Well,
Yeah.
let me thank everybody for being a part and keeping this moving and keeping it going. I had the good fortune on Saturday to meet a lovely young lady, delightful young lady, who told me that Dr. James Miller was her father. And so I met your daughter and her husband at the St. Catherine St. Lucie Church,
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
we
Talk
were,
about that.
yeah, we were doing some housing stuff. And so, of course, I was delighted and pleased to meet them and have an opportunity to interact. A lot of good things are going on. A lot of good things have happened. We've got to keep making them happen. I have actually seen so many grants come to the city of Chicago to different entities in the last month until I'm having trouble keeping up with them. And so money is indeed flowing in from the federal government. Senator Durbin and I did a roundtable with students at the Westinghouse High School last on Friday. But not only did we talk, we also distributed a couple $1 million to the Chicago public school system. So a lot of good things are happening. I am saddened a little bit because we were not able to maintain a majority in the House of Representatives. And all of us will begin to see what that means in a little bit. What it really means is that the origination of spending, the money bills, often comes out of the House. And of course, one group has a tendency to start at a higher level than another group. And so that's more than likely going to happen in that we probably are going to see a lot of reductions. We're going to hear talk of a lot of reductions. And so some of the resources that we thought were going to be public spending are not going to be public spending. Are they going to be reduced spending? But hopefully that will be for a 2 year period only, and then we can get back on track. And I think we can, if we can win 2 Democratic Senate seats in the state of Georgia, then we can do practically anything politically that we seriously decide to do in this country. So thank you all very much, and I look forward to the dialogue.
All right, Dr. Thomas, Dr. Tony.
All right, so let's welcome everybody to Couch Conversations. I thank Congressman for the opportunity. I'm a family and obesity doctor with some training in nutrition and functional medicine. I'm gonna kind of start with my intro, and then we can circle to our next, and that's Mr. Harrington. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Joe, you got to unmute. That's one of the things you always have to remember to do. Unmute yourself. My name is Joe Harrington. Most of my career was spent either in public health or healthcare. Worked at 3 hospitals. Retired in 2017 as a regional health officer for Cook County, and also had the opportunity to work as an assistant commissioner under my esteemed friend and colleague, Dr. Terry Mason. Looking forward to a great conversation, and always good to be among stellar colleagues like this.
All right, so Dr. Mason, why don't you introduce yourself?
Well, good evening. Good evening. Always good to be on Couch Conversations with my colleagues, and we thank the Congressman and Nikki for making this forum available. I'm a retired urologist. I spent 26 years as a board certified urologist in the city. practicing out mostly out of Mercy Hospital, trained in Michael Reese, but also spent time in public service as Commissioner of Health for the City of Chicago, as well as the Chief Operating Officer for the Cook County Department of Public Health. And glad to be a member of this forum. And hopefully we'll have some great things to share and answer your questions.
Absolutely. Dr. Miller.
Hi, good evening, everybody. My name is Dr. James Miller. I'm a retired clinician, practice internal medicine on the west side and near Western Suburb. Most of my career, I did spend some time practicing on the south side as well. And happy to be joining on in the conversation tonight. Hopefully, we'll be able to help inform somebody and to give someone advice or information that they may be able to have better health.
Thank you. Dr. Graham.
I'm also a retired physician. I spent 30 years working in the western suburbs of Chicago. I was a specialist, a rheumatologist. And after I retired, I spent 2 years in Washington, D.C., working in a congressman's office. Healthcare is my passion, and I'm going to try and answer your questions if I can.
Dr. Maya.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Shout out to Nikki. And thank you to Congressman Danny K. Davis for creating this platform, having us. Thank you to everybody on here. Dr. Ansel, I didn't, I know we got to connect, and it's great to see you again. And I'm excited to learn from the community. I love these talks and giving us an opportunity to connect with each other. Is one of the great things that came out of the last 2 or so years that we've experienced these new changes. So thankful for that. Excited to get into conversation.
And Dr. Johnson, and as you introduce yourself, I do want to ask you to, since you have you help us to see better. I would love for you to share after you introduce yourself, just your basic tips on how people can better take care of their eyes. I know a lot of the patients that we see you because they have diabetes and they have hypertension and chronic diseases that may affect the eyes. But I would love to hear from you, basic tips for people as you kind of introduce yourself.
Sure. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Hampton. I want to also give a shout out to Nikki. When Nikki invites you to something, it's so hard to tell her no. So I appreciate and I'm blessed to be part of this esteemed panel. I'm not retired, although people ask me oftentimes when is that happening, but I have a passion for what I do. I'm an optometrist and I've been in private practice in Blue Island for about 32 years. And I am a diabetes eye care expert in that that's our focus in our practice. We do a lot of different things, but we connect the dots between your vision care with glasses and contacts, with the health of the eye, and everything in between, because it's all connected. And a lot of times when people think about an optometrist or eye care, they're thinking about their glasses and they want to see better. Well, we want to make sure you're seeing better for the rest of your life. So I think about how when we look inside the eye, we have a pretty good idea looking at the blood vessels in the back of the eye, your overall health. So if you're living with high blood pressure, living with diabetes, and Dr. Graham, I know you're rheumatology trained. So there's a lot of the autoimmune disease like lupus, sarcoidosis, rheumatoid arthritis that also affects the eyes and vision. And so we connect the dots. We talk about lifestyle, not just, okay, these glasses are going to be good for you. But as you asked Dr. Hampton, what some little tips. So we give some of the same tips that Dr. Mason gives in terms of eating right. There's certain nutritional supplements. People ask about carrots and things of that nature. Is it good for the eyes? The short answer is yes, but there's so many other things. Having an anti-inflammatory diet goes a long way to helping with dry eye. So a lot of times dry eye can be the initial symptom for something like rheumatoid arthritis or sarcoidosis or even diabetes, because those are inflammatory conditions, especially diabetes, that can affect the tear glands around the eyes. And so one quick tip is just people, a lot of times we as eye doctors fall short. We just tell people, oh, just go buy some drops, over the counter drops. And you see all of these drops, and it's confusing to the public, and all of them are not good for you. So what we're recommending for people to do is look for drops that are preservative free, not the drops that start with the letter V, but that take the red out. But look for preservative free eye drops. That's the safest bet for you because you can't overdose on them. There's also a nice spray you can use because some people have problems putting drops in their eyes. So there's a spray called Optase spray that you can get online or in some of the drugstores that you just close your eyes, you spray, you blink, and it works the moisture inside the eyes. That's all that is preservative-free artificial tears. Nothing special about it, but it's easy to administer for a lot of people. For other conditions like diabetes, real quick one, a lot of times the vision will fluctuate a lot. So it's so important to control your blood sugar levels and know what your numbers are. A lot of times we always ask, do you know what your A1C, the ABCs of eye care, if you're living with diabetes, know what your A1C, the B is know what your blood pressure is and see your cholesterol level. Know those numbers, even though your physician may tell you they're fine. It's good to know those numbers because they're high, medium, and low normals. So that kind of gives you a benchmark to work towards when you know your numbers and gets you engaged in your own healthcare. Computers are a big thing now. We worry about our children being on a computer so much. The blue light, it is controversial whether the blue light actually causes physical damage to the eye tissues, which can if it's intense over a long period of time, like if you're outside in the sun. The one thing that blue light protection will do is help your circadian rhythms, your sleep cycles. So a lot of times our children, and myself, I'm guilty of this, up late working on a computer, and then you have insomnia. You just can't go to sleep. So for your children that you can control, have them get off their phones and computers 2 hours before bedtime. That's a big tip right there. There are nutritional supplements can help supplement different proteins in the back of the eye to help give your eye a little bit more blue light protection. Oh. And I would make sure you talk to your eye doctor if you're interested in those things. I don't want to, give commercial, but there are a few things out there that lutein and zeaxanthin are those natural ingredients that are in our vegetables, like different kale. You have it in your colored sweet potatoes. You have it in your green leafy vegetables, anything that's brightly colored. So basically eating the rainbow. That helps you supplement the proteins in the back of the eye. That can help fortify that a little bit against blue light protection. So those are a few tips right now.
Thank you. I see Nikki is back with us. Welcome, Nikki, if you can hear me, but you may be frozen. And if you are, what I'll do is suggest that we say hi to Linda, who's saying good evening to everybody. And I'm doing kind of Nikki's job right now. Good evening came from Virginia Knight. And then it looks like Mr. Brown has a question related to Bell's palsy and diabetes. So maybe we can kind of chime in and give some feedback. Not necessarily an eye question, but I will say, since I see a lot of diabetics, my goodness, I think anything that's diabetes is there's something called glycation where the glucose joins in with cells in your body, and you have cells throughout your entire body. So when glycation occurs, it causes damage. You do not, sugar is such a toxic substance that you only have a teaspoon in your blood, and when that extra sugar floats around in your blood, it can go all over, wreaking havoc everywhere, including obviously in the eyes. But when you get that, so anything that can cause damage, nerve damage is one of the things that can also occur. So it would make logical sense that a person who is diabetic, particularly if they're poorly controlled, their risk for Bell's palsy is going to probably be a little higher in a diabetic than in a non-diabetic. And I'm going to say, and I hate to use the term diabetic. We like to say things like person with diabetes, you know. But having said that, Bell's palsy is when I remember when I was in medical school with Dr. Pete, and we learned that the seventh cranial nerve is like a 7, and it grabs your eyelid and it holds it down. So a lot of times they're not able to open their eye properly. They have, you know, a little bit of a wrinkled brow, and it's an asymmetrical face. A lot of people think they're having a stroke, but they're not. They're just having a seventh cranial nerve problem. So the simple answer, I absolutely believe that there's a connection between diabetes and Bell's palsy, and that your risk is going to be greater. So I don't know if my colleagues have any other thoughts about that before we move along.
Yeah, there's with diabetes, you have it hits your 8 major organ functions, and neuropathy is one. We hear a lot about the neuropathy in the foot. That's why you have to see a podiatrist if you're living with diabetes. But also we see it in the eyes too. And Bell's palsy is a neurological condition, and it worries a lot of people. Even in the back of the eye, we see thinning of the nerve fibers in the back of the eye before, over almost 50% of the time, before we see bleeding in the back of the eye. So we worry about bleeding and swelling and scarring in the back of the eye, which is the cause for vision loss and blindness. But with the right technology, you can see the thinning of the nerve fibers back there before you see bleeding. So a lot of times I'll send these to reports to physicians that may not be bleeding, but we see early neuropathy. And so we can see progress in that. And those are touch points for us to tell the patients, talk to your physician, how are your numbers, and give that a little bit more accountability. So the neuropathy is very, very common, not just in the eyes, but throughout the body.
I'm curious if any of my colleagues have. I remember when I did a rotation for ophthalmology, and I was amazed at, you know, what you saw. I mean, it was like the only place where you can look at a blood vessel directly and like see the inside of a blood vessel. I don't know if any of my colleagues rotated through ophthalmology and were amazed. It was like an amazing thing. It was like watching the Discovery Channel, and you get a chance to kind of experience that every day in your practice. But as you've suggested, you have to have the right tools. Yeah.
Yeah, we you know, I agree that it's a you know, when we talk about diseases that affect our circulatory system, and we're mostly talking about the arterial system, and you know, looking in the eye is the one place that you can see without that you can see an artery without cutting the person. Other than that, in order to be able to see an artery, you have to make an incision. So. And that's a tremendous way to look at the vessels and see, but that is also a representation of what's happening in other parts of the body. It's the eye is, you know, the artery is visible there, but the same kind of damage is happening in other organ system. And you know, just agreeing with Dr. Johnson, you know, when I first started practice, my office was next door to an optometrist. And he and I used to talk, and he would often, you know, say, you know what, I'm going to be sitting a lot of patients now because I'm, you know, he was recognizing a lot of systemic diseases that were occurring, even though people would come seeking glasses or, you know, other kinds of issues with their eyes. But in that, during that his evaluation, he was recognizing that these individuals have a lot of other things going on, and he would say, you know, you need to go see, you know, your internist or your primary care doctor, because there's other things going on besides your vision that need to be evaluated and need to be taken care of. Otherwise, they're going to cause problems in other areas. And so the eye is just like the eye sees out. Looking in the eye, one can see a lot of evidence of what's happening in one's body.
You know, I'd like to add that there's a few things. Number one of the biggest, I won't say mistakes, but one of the things that we did, or I don't know if it was just medicine or where it all comes from, but we always get people to think about symptoms. And while symptoms are important, they're rarely the very earliest thing that you see, or the very earliest part of what a disease, how a disease manifests itself. Because there are a lot of things that don't have any symptoms at all that are apparent to you that could be doing damage, which is why, see, symptoms is telling people they need to wait till they get symptoms to go see a doctor. It's like telling somebody that owns a car that they need to wait till there's smoke coming out of the tailpipe before they take it in to see a mechanic, or that it's knocking and making a bunch of noise. This is why I thank Dr. Davis so much, Congressman Davis, for making certain that there were things called federally qualified health centers available, where people, despite their economic situation, could go in and be checked for things. Those things that you can be checked for may be things that are wrong way before any of them produce a symptom. And so I just wanted to throw that out, because I think one of the disservices that is happening with medicine is that we have made people rely too much on symptoms rather than getting it checked out even before a symptom takes place.
I concur. Don't wait till you have blurry vision to come and see us.
Well, that's excellent. So I'm gonna. Well, go ahead, Nikki.
No, go ahead, because I know Dr. Mason had a lot to talk about this evening. So right ahead.
Yeah, in fact, I'm comfortable if Dr. Mason wants to add additional comments. So let's do that.
Well, I think that the issue is, as I learned and continue to learn about the role of food. I mean, I've seen statistics as high as 50% of many of the diseases that we have. I don't know what that noise is in the background. Of the diseases that we have are related to the things that we eat. And unfortunately, what we eat varies quite a bit from person to person, and by their economic circumstance, as well as the level of education, perhaps. And so we really do need to take more time. I think Dr. Miller, not Dr. Miller, but Dr. Ansel was talking about some of these chemicals that are in the foods that are helpful for us. Some of the pigments that are in the fruits, these things that give things deep colors, those contain chemicals that are antioxidants that can really stop some of the bad things from happening. And a lot of the foods that we eat, unfortunately, create problems by causing a damage on some of these smaller blood vessels. I saw that a lot when I was dealing with men with erectile dysfunction, because, like it or not, the eyes aren't the only windows to what's happening with our various microcirculation. So is the penis. And the microcirculation in the penis is controlled a lot by the inflammatory things that we eat. And most of those things they come from things that don't come out of the ground, most of it. Not all of it, but a good part of it. And so we need to really, really rethink about that. And of course, a lot of processed foods and other kinds of things. And I'm sure perhaps some of the things that may impact our other systems, like the one that Dr. Graham looks at in terms of rheumatology, those things, and Dr. Graham, maybe you want to comment about the inflammatory nature of some of those diseases.
Well, thank you, Dr. Mason. It's true. Many of these diseases, rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, Sjogren's syndrome, all have a very significant component of inflammation. And I can tell you that this year, in our latest guidelines, they talked about the Mediterranean diet as being preferred, evidence-based, for people with autoimmune disease with an inflammatory component. And yes, our whole goal in treating these diseases is to reduce the inflammation as low as we can to keep them from being damaged. And that damage goes everywhere. It isn't just the skin, it's the blood vessels, it's the tissues of the lung, it can be tissues in other parts of the body. so that we know that inflammation is one of the most injurious sets of circumstances internally in your body. So it makes a lot of sense to promote health by promoting diets that reduce or minimize inflammation.
Dr. Maya, I know you've been quiet, but I know you got something to say.
You know what? I'm listening and learning and taking what you're saying and thinking about, people have different beliefs. For those that of us that kind of, the Bible is a source for growth and progress in our lives. As Dr. Mason was talking about what we put into our lives and the options we have for nutrition, there's that. Look, I am not a pastor or whatever, like I always got to say that in case when I don't get it exactly right. I don't want to text saints. Now, what I want is us to go to a scripture that says, I set before you today life and death, and it says choose life. And my sister, actually, I never talk about it, but my sister's a vegan chef. And we were talking the other day, and I was like, well, what made you be a vegan chef? And she went to school and studied nutrition and things like that. And she was like, she's a cancer survivor, brain cancer, and just has survived so many things. And I said, well, what made you want to be a vegan chef? Because I come from a cooking, like we like to cook. New Orleans is in my blood. Mississippi, we like to cook, And I was like, what would make you say cook vegan food? And she was like, no, vegan food. And what she cooks tastes good. Sometimes, a lot of times even better. Most times even better, because I don't have to go to sleep afterwards. But she said, Maya, this was this weekend. She said, I got tired of feeding people things that I knew were going to harm them. She was like, every time I cook it, I felt like I was feeding people death, and I want to feed people life, and it just, Dr. Mason, as you was talking, I don't know the exact scripture, but it says, I set before you today life and death, and to choose life. And so when I have the option to put something in my body that's healthy, that brings life, that's my opportunity to choose life. One of the ways I can choose life.
Okay.
So that's what when she said that, it struck me as so profound. She said, I got tired of feeding people death. Profound, no? And she was like, I want to feed people life. And so she became a vegan chef. Yeah. So that's what I want to say. When you get the chance, we have to do it as a community, because there is, Dr. Mason mentioned a difference in people's intake. There's a lot of factors, right? Preference, there's a lot of factors. Finances. Also, one of the factors we see playing out in Chicago is environmental kind of design. So, upon us as, people who advocate for our community, to continue to advocate for places that feed people life, healthy places and resources in our communities. And then, even then, when those healthy places are there, it's, important for us, for our families and our tribes, to encourage each other to choose the options that are going to give us life and contribute to our life, and to kind of stay away from the options that contribute to our death. Yeah. So that's what I got to say.
All right, Dr. Maya, that would be Deuteronomy 30 and 19. I just thought
I was going to say, now, no one of y'all know the scripture. Let's hear it. What does it say?
It's Deuteronomy 30 and 19, and it says, I call heaven and the earth to witness against you, that on this day that I set forth, will you choose life or death? And I know that that's what you were talking about when you mentioned it. So it's Deuteronomy 30.
And then right after it, what does it say?
Blessings or a curse. Oh, that what I choose of thee. I would have to actually go pull the scripture, but I just know it's Deuteronomy 13 and 19.
And then, like,
Deacon Miller, Deacon Dr. Miller, I know you close to a Bible than I am, because I'm sitting by the Christmas tree. So if you can grab that and go to Deuteronomy 30 and 19, Deacon Miller
You know,
gonna
I
get that
say
for you.
train
But
up
why
a child. The funny thing is, I know the resolution is the next part of the scripture, but as a child who was trained in the scripture that I read, you know, I know it says, therefore choose life. It's like it gives you the options. And it's one of the few things in our life where they give us the options, but then they tell us what the answer is. You know, so many times in life we confused about, you know, what we should do, when we should do it, and so many factors where we have, and you know, free will, you know, great for people to, you know, choose so many things. But this is one of the things, very rarely does it say, you know, here are your options, and here's what I want you to choose, and here's why. And and something about that entire scripture says that.
Well, while Deacon Dr. James Miller is pulling out their Bible to get it for you, want to say hey to Miss Spencer, who's here. She says blessings to everyone. Jackie Robinson is here with us. She also says hello to everyone that is here. You know, Tynetta Wilson is here, and she has a question. But in the interim, Nellie King is here, and she says good evening to everyone. I don't want to start with Tanetta's question because I know Deacon Miller gonna be ready in like 2 seconds. So, okay, so we're going to go on with Tynetta's question. So her first question, she has two questions. Her first question is, good evening, Congressman, Doctors Nikki and panel. Question for Dr. Tony. Talk to me about what a healthy dinner plate looks like and what a healthy dinner plate looks like, and how does lack of meals or one meal a day interrupt the body?
Well, I think I'm a very simple, rational person. So the first thing what's the perfect human diet? I think it kind of starts with understanding your ancestry. And there are cultures that do better on plants, and there are cultures that do better on animals. You know, you got hunters and gatherers. If you think about the Indians when they were first, when their country was invaded, they were pretty much hunters and gatherers, ate buffalo and things of that nature, and they thrived. They were taller, didn't have diabetes, hypertension, all those things. And then when the European diet was introduced, they all got sick, and they are arguably the sickest culture in the country because they're not eating what I feel is what was part of their heritage. So the moment the buffalo was killed, they didn't do well. So again, that's an example of what happens when you don't eat what is probably the most appropriate food for that particular culture. I have patients who are vegan. Most of my patients are low carb, keto, ketovore, or carnivore. And what I find is that each person should follow what their body is telling them is the perfect human diet. So for example, if I have a diabetic in front of me, I say to them, there's no need to focus on the dietary pattern the way you're thinking. I say to them, your meter is your answer. So if you consume a particular food and an hour later your sugar skyrockets, that's not the perfect human diet for you. This is not rocket science. So I asked them to do an experiment on their body. Now, I will give them general guidelines. I will say to them that seed oils, in other words, if you take a seed, canola, corn, vegetable oils, and you use chemicals to turn that into oil, that's going to be inflammatory. It's going to cause what we call oxidative stress. And when I mentioned glycation earlier, you're going to have more of that negative impact on your body. So I prefer they do things like olive oil, coconut oil, avocado oil, which are just cold pressed. Not all those chemicals. Now, again, you can find coconut oil that's been processed, but for the most part, those are better options. I tell my patients, sugar is to be avoided, period. I tell my patients, cook at home and stop eating processed food. I tell my patients, highly refined grains are to be avoided. And I tell my patients that the essential nutrients for the human being is amino acids, which are proteins, and fatty acids. So those are essential to life, meaning that if you don't consume them, you will perish. So I asked them to make sure they get sufficient protein, avoid starchy vegetables, dried fruit, which is nothing but sugar, and highly processed meats if possible. But for the most part, I focus on what they should avoid, and I ask them to check their meter if they're diabetic. Now, I can say that because there's, half of America is borderline diabetic or diabetic. So if you focus on diets that reduce those inflammatory foods, it's highly probable that a person will do well. So I'm not really answering the question the way it's stated. What's a healthy dinner plate? Well, it's adequate protein and non-starchy vegetables in my lane. But I think that there's multiple ways to achieve that, but it's multiple factors, your heritage, your medical conditions, and there are just certain things you have to think in. And the population I serve, they do really well when you reduce the high carb foods. And I mean, this is maybe an outlier, but I had a patient just today, and she had cancer, was devastated only 4 or 5 months ago. And I said to her that I think you should have the chemo that's recommended, but I also I recommended a previous guest book, which was Keto for Cancer. Now, this may be a coincidence, but we looked at her scan, which was only 4 months different, and it was metastatic cancer. And within 4 months, it's almost like I'm making this up, her scan just kind of cleared up. Was it the chemo? Was it the diet? I don't care. All I know is that if you try to treat cancer with just chemicals and drugs and you don't do lifestyle with it, I guarantee you're going to fall short of your goal. So that's what I tell people. Figure out what dietary pattern you want to use, and then listen to your body if you have a way to test, and just eat real food. And I think if you do that, you'll be in good shape, no matter which approach you decide to take.
So, Nikki, I have it. It's Deuteronomy 30:19, like you said. It says, "This day I call the heavens and the earth as witnesses against you, that I have set before you life and death." Almost like Dr. Mason, Dr. Hampton, and the team is telling us, hey, community, it's time to start cleaning out our bodies and eating what's right for us, and healing doing what we can to heal ourselves. It says, "I set before you life and death, blessings and curses." My sister said, hey, certain foods I don't cook for my community because I was feeding them death. But we know scientifically that certain foods bring life, So I set before you life and death, blessings and curses. And it says the next one, this was it. Now choose life so that you and your children may live. And so that was the part that, I was like, I remember reading that and being like, not many times does it give you a quiz and give you the answers. And that's how important it is for us to choose life when it's time to eat, when it's time to get vaccinated, when it's time to do those things they're saying earlier, when it's time to go in and get screenings so that we're not waiting to smoke is coming out of car. Every opportunity we have to choose life or choose things that sustain our lives, then we should.
And if I may just add a little bit to that, is that, and I think those are the options we have in a lot of choices that we often make about the decision we make about things that are going on in our life, as in eating, also just in living. We make choices, and sometimes there's a good choice, and sometimes there's a choice that has negative effect. And so we have to choose the one that is going to give us some positive effect and going to be good for us, and not just us, the individual, but us, the community at large. And so some things may be good for one person, but it may not be good for the group. And we have to not be selfish, but be considerate and concerned and loving enough to sometimes make sacrifice and make the choice that is best for everybody. And so choosing so it's choosing what is good as opposed to choosing that which is bad to us, the individual, bad to our bodies, bad for our minds, bad for our health, as opposed to those things that add to us, add longevity, add quality to our lives. Those are the choices. And when we look at our bodies, or look at the bodies of our patients, one should be aware that there are constant changes in the cells that are in our bodies. And sometimes these cellular changes are the beginning of things that go awry, that that may be the beginning of a cancer cell that will multiply and ultimately become a disease that proliferate. So there are things that are constantly going on in our body. Now, our bodies are made to be able to defend itself to some extent. So there's a lot of cells that the body, if it's a healthy body, it is able to attack those cells. And to destroy them. A sick body is not going to be able to do as well because it is fighting so many things that it just eventually does not have the stamina nor the ability to overcome all of the different problems that's coming at it. And so, when we choose to eat those things that are going to make us healthier, we are empowering our body to be able to withstand some of the insults that it's going to be encountering from day to day. So these are constant changes and things that are going on. And so we have to be able to strengthen our body so that it'll be able to withstand these things that are happening.
One of the things I'd like to begin to start thinking more about, and I'm actually beginning to write about it, and that is, I don't like the word diet. I don't want anything associated with the word die in that. I'm going to go with what Prince Asiel used to say, and that is, we should talk about livids, not diets. And we should have people on diet, on what people need to eat to live. We wrote a book called How to Eat to Live. So one of the things that I say is and there's a lot of misinformation. A lot of the misinformation has been put out there purposely by the industries that benefit from those misunderstandings. And one that I'd like to just make right now is protein. And when people think of protein, they immediately think of meat. And that's wrong. That's absolutely wrong. I mean, there is protein in meat, but that is not the source of protein, because all the animals we eat for so-called protein don't eat animals themselves. Most of those animals that we eat for meat are herbivores. If we talk about the biggest, strongest, most muscular animals on the planet, most all of them are herbivores. So those animals, obviously, we say, well, they've adapted to do that. Well, I mean, if I don't want to go back, and I'm not going to go back into the scripture because I would go straight to Genesis 1:9. But what I would say is that our bodies, because of what we need to provide scaffolding in our digestive systems for the formation of different other things that we need to manufacture, our vitamins and other things, we have to be very careful. And I think a lot of these things have become what we eat out of habit, as opposed to what we need to eat out of necessity for health. And if you look at cultures around if you just look at cultures, Dr. Hampton made a point, but if you look at cultures around the world and you can look at them, there are many that do eat a lot of animal, and they want to call it animal protein. I just call it animals, because your real protein source is plants. People think of protein and they think meat. No, that's wrong. Yes, there is protein in meat, but it is not the only source of protein, because all the animals that you're eating for their protein don't eat meat themselves. And I want to make that point really, really clear. That's why I said it twice, because we have got to break this cycle of these things that feed industries that are not in our best interest. And I mean, just like dairy. I mean, we know now that the milk that all mammals, for the most part, make milk for their species, and they give it to their young. And when their young are old enough to eat the food that they need to eat for themselves, they no longer need that. We're the only species that continues to eat that. And now we know that milk contains insulin growth factor 1. Why? Why is that a problem? Because you got milk, which is made by a cow who is trying to take a calf, which weighs 65 pounds at birth, put it on the track to become 400 pounds. So it needs to have those chemicals that help their cells grow in order to build the kind of muscle cells and things of that nature. But that's not necessarily the same for humans in terms of the need for cow milk. And we can have a conversation about that. And I don't know where all that background's coming from. Probably somebody needs to mute something. But we really do need to look at this very critically. And I am not, and Dr. Hampton and I have a gentleman's disagreement here, but I am not one who is an advocate of making so much of what you eat from animal sources. And there's a number of reasons for that. And I think that it's important that we understand what those nuances are so we could talk about them in a way that people understand them so they're not misled.
And I'll just add that when I became a metabolic health doctor, I intentionally called myself metabolic health doc with the understanding that there may be more than one way to achieve metabolic health. So why do I lean towards animal protein? Because it's, there's something called the DIET score, the indispensable diet, I think it's like, I'm trying to remember it right now, but it's the digestibility, let's just say the digestibility of protein. And what I found is that when I have people, most of the patients I see, when they're trying to, deal with their diabetes as an example, they struggle when they consume foods that raise their blood sugar. So if I say that they can chase their brown rice with more medicine, they're on a roller coaster. So because the brown rice is going to be 45 carbs divided by 4 is 11 teaspoons of sugar. What I found in my practice is that when they're constantly consuming foods that raise their blood glucose, and then they chase it with medicine, now they have a risk for hypoglycemia, because how can you guarantee the amount of insulin that they gave themselves for glyburide or whatever is going to match that need? So what I tell patients, why consume foods that do that when you can, like, for example, I'm making an animated video about a chaffle, which is a waffle made from eggs, cheese, and use almond or coconut flour as well. A chaffle has 1 to 2 carbs, right? A waffle has 20 to 30 or 40 carbs per waffle. Now, why would I logically think it's a good idea for a diabetic to eat a waffle when they can do a chaffle? It's just a very practical approach. And what I find is that within weeks, I can take people off their insulin and off their medicine. Now, if that's harmful to their health, they're not on medicine anymore, blood sugar, A1C is back to 5 point something, diet, blood pressure gets better, et cetera, then that's a risk I'll take, because I take people off medicine every week. So I guess what I'm getting at is, when people are in front of me and they say to me, this is a dietary pattern that they prefer, and it may be low fat like Dr. Mason, and it may be low carb, if it's from my perspective, what I find is that I just find that the success I see in front of me is so convincing that it's hard for me to then tell that person, go eat eat quinoa when it's going to raise their blood sugar. So that's kind of where we have a little bit of a disconnect. Now, I absolutely have successful vegans in my practice, but most of my diabetics who get off medicine are doing low carb. But it's logical, because they have a carb intolerance. So why would they not do better if they get rid of the things that they can't tolerate? So I think so again, it's very difficult to not get emotional. And I think we both have different perspectives because we've seen successes with both perspectives. What I want to do is live in a world where a carnivore is allowed to be a carnivore if he's healthy, and live in a world where a vegan is allowed to be a vegan if that's working for them, because that's the world where we meet people where they are. And until we find evidence, I'm talking about randomized controlled trials that say that any particular dietary pattern is harmful, then we can, talk about that. But you'll notice that all the large organizations, the Heart Association, the Diabetes Association, and the endocrine, they all give you like a list of dietary options. They'll say Mediterranean, they'll say low carb, they'll say low fat, they'll say calorie restricted. And that's because they've recognized that there's evidence to suggest that all these dietary patterns are better than the standard American diet. And as long as you're not doing that diet, you're probably going to do better. But I understand how challenging this panel discussion is for me and Dr. Mason, because I'm on he's on documentaries about plants and I'm on documentaries about meat. So it's like we're coming, but we have to live in a world where we can both coexist so that patients hear both perspectives and then they're allowed to make their own decision.
Well, we have an interesting question. And the interesting question that we have is from Miss Peterson. Miss Peterson sent a question and she asked, is there a food that actually causes violence? The diets that our youth eat, I believe, may be making them angry. Is there any truth to that? Well, wait a minute, because Doug came off mute. So if Doug has something to say.
Well, I don't want to steal Dr. Tony's thunder, but I have just real concerns about these energy drinks. And if you're taking huge amounts of caffeine and you're getting huge bursts, not to mention a lot of sugar, I don't know how you can remain calm, peaceful, and thoughtful. I'm curious to know what Dr. Tony has to say.
Well, there you go. So this is what I was talking about when people say they're hangry, right? And a lot of that does have to do with variability in their blood sugar. So again, going back to my big message is, why would I ask a person who is insulin resistant, borderline diabetic, et cetera, to then consume stuff that's going to raise their sugar? Then it's got to go down. It's up and down. It's like a roller coaster. I would prefer to be a narrow range of up and down. And when it's narrow, a type 1 diabetic, you cannot control my wife is type 1 diabetic. You cannot control type 1 diabetes with a diet that's going to raise your sugar. It just is. And then guess what? And if I were to speak about how does that affect my relationship if my wife's sugars are up and down, she's not going to be thinking clearly. She's going to be, hangry. She's going to be irritable. Have you ever experienced hypoglycemia before? Have you experienced hyperglycemia? So of course, those people who have up and down sugars are going to be prone to moments of irrational thinking, violence, etc. So I think that absolutely your diet can affect your behavior, because what keeps us stable is a stable blood sugar. And we only have 1 teaspoon of sugar in our blood. I remind you guys of that. So if we do anything that's going to bump that up, and when before I started doing this dietary pattern where I reduced carbs, I felt like I had to graze. I felt like I was always hungry, and I always felt like I had to eat something. I've eaten once today, and then I'll have dinner after this conversation, and I'm still not hungry because I have sufficient amino acids and fatty acids from the food I ate for lunch. And I hate to say it, but it was a half of a chicken. And it was roasted, and it didn't have flour on it. And it gave me all the essential nutrients that I need to survive. So yeah, short answer, it definitely is associated.
Well, we have a principle. Go ahead, Dr. Mason.
I was going to say, I would just say just one other thing. You have to be careful when you give certain examples of certain types of foods. And most of the examples that Dr. Hampton gave were starchy kind of foods, or foods that will increase can increase one's blood sugar. But that's not when I think about the foods, for example, that I eat, I don't eat those kinds of things. When we talk about, and I just want to make that point very clear. What I'm talking about, I'm not talking about eating a bunch of starches. I'm not talking about eating a bunch of potatoes. I'm not talking about eating that kind of stuff. I'm talking about greens. I'm talking about some beans. I'm talking about peas, some peas. I'm talking about those kinds of things, but green, mostly green vegetables or yellow vegetables or none of those like carrots and all. Like today, what I had was I had a big thing of, and I love mixed vegetables. So there was broccoli and there was carrots in it. There was all kinds of stuff like that. Those things will not cause glycemic spikes for the most part. They won't. They usually do not. Those other things that you mentioned before, yes, they will. And those things I would not recommend. I don't recommend them at all for people. What our people are suffering from is we're eating a lot of processed, and when I talk about low carbs, you can't get any lower carb than whole foods with plants. You can't get any lower carb than that. Unless you just drink water. If you're not eating anything that's processed, like a rice or quinoa or any of those kinds of things, but you're eating just I'm talking about real vegetables. There's not a lot of opportunity there for the kinds of things we just talked about. So I think that we got to drink water. I think if there's anything we don't talk about enough in our conversations, and that is we got to get people to drink more water, not stuff that contains water, but water, because our body needs it. Those 10 trillion cells that we have in our body are estimated 10 trillion cells need the things that the water gives us. So not to get on a whole diatribe about that, but I did want to make that clear that what I'm talking about is more the green, more of the yellow, more of the all reds and all those other color vegetables. That's what I'm talking about, that you can make a lot of different things in a lot of different ways that you don't have to add. And I would agree with Dr. Hampton I would agree not to add a bunch of starchy kinds of things to them. I don't agree with that. But I think that if we get our folks, and that's what's missing, because a lot of us aren't cooking anymore. A lot of us don't cook. I grew up in a house of 10 kids. There was a pot on our stove every day that my mother had that had beans in it, that had greens in it, that had all kinds of those kinds of things without a lot of that sort of starch. And we didn't drink a lot of those things. And obesity wasn't even a problem in my childhood for the most part, because number one, we had a lot of exercise. We went outside and did a lot of running, as I'm sure Dr. Miller and a bunch of us, because Dr. Miller I can pick on because he's about my age, maybe even Dr. Douglas, Dr. Graham and Mr. Harrington. But we did go out and do a lot of different things. So I'm going to stop right there and I don't want to go back into a back and forth, but there are ways to look at this that work, and they have worked for centuries, and they've worked not just for centuries. When I was eating what you might call a low carb diet, which was my porterhouse or T-bone steak every day, that bought me a trip to Dr. Jones Cardiac Cath Lab. And I ended up with 3 stents in my coronary arteries, okay, and prescriptions for all kinds of things like that. Now I don't care what you believe. I would never tell you to do that, and I don't think none of us on this panel would tell you to do something like that. But I did.
Well, I'm actually doing it.
Really quickly, I want to get this last question in. I want to get this last question in because our hour is narrowing. And this young lady, who is a principal at one of our West Side schools, actually has written this question twice. So I really want to share. She wants to stay anonymous, but she says, thank you, Dr. Mason, for talking about processed foods. We have a big problem in our Chicago public schools. Our children start the day off every day with something they call the breakfast of champions. It's hot chips and a really sugary juice. And the kids crash and they're angry all day. I believe the young lady who asked the question before me that says it's got to be something in the diets that can cause our kids to be angry. Is there anything that we can do in our schools to help this?
There was a thing called the Good Food Purchasing Program that was passed by the city as well as the county. And it was passed in order to convince the governmental agencies to make food, real food available. Unfortunately, a lot of our kitchens don't cook anymore. A lot of the foods that kids cook in the schools now is rolled in and put in some sort of overgrown heater to give students. So we're not, and we're giving the kids way too much. And I believe Dr. Tony would agree with this. That stuff, a lot of that stuff that I've seen is I've gone back to some of the schools and look what's being served is not good for our kids at all. It may cover what the FDA and the some of the other things said they need in terms of this number of this and that number of that, but it's not whole foods. It's way too much processed foods.
All right. Thank you so much. Well, Cecilia says she agrees. I think she's agreeing with what the principal had written. Michelle Bird is here and she says, great topic. Harvey Howard is very interested in this conversation. Tynetta says, wow, I love this and thank you so much. She also says, thank you to the beautiful Dr. Maya for sharing her comments and her scriptures. And then Miss Spencer says, you can believe in God, but we also have to use common sense and choose what are the best food options to benefit your own health and life. And then she says, amen. Now, I know you guys hate to hear me say this. And that statement I want to make is that our hour has neared and we have gotten to the end. But we will definitely have a great topic for you on the next week, on next Monday. We want to just remind everyone. Oh, I do have an announcement that I know the Congressman will not mind us sharing. It's from Donald Dew at HSI. Donald Dew and Deborah Williams would ask if we would share this announcement that he has. HSI is doing the 12 days of Christmas. These 12 days of Christmas, because we know that something called the holiday blues comes around and that all of our lives are super busy and we don't take a moment for ourselves. They are asking that if you would join them in their 12 days of Christmas. They will be adding a link to the Facebook page. And for the next 12 days, they started today. So there's 11 more days left up until the 23rd of December. Every day at 12 noon, they're going to have mindful wellness, mental health tips, and meditation for 12 minutes. So they're asking everyone to join them on a Zoom for a simple 12 minutes. And they're having different doctors give out mindfulness, wellness, and mental health tips with 12 moments of meditation. So I want to make sure that you guys grab the Facebook page link that Mr. Dew is going to share with us to make sure that you can be a part of that. As we go around the table, as we always do, Dr. James Miller, what's your until next Monday?
My until next Monday is that information is good if it's utilized appropriately. And after doing this forum, there's always a lot of information that's given. Some is straightforward, some is maybe have multiple sides to it. But generally, both sides are things that people can take and use for good. And so I hope that people will listen and not just listen and be excited, but be excited. I want you to be excited, but be excited enough that you will take these things at heart and utilize them in your life and to make you a healthier person. So information not used is a waste.
Outstanding. Dr. Douglas Graham, you're until next Monday.
So, Nikki, I want to shift gears just a little bit. And the bad news is that COVID is back. So if your last vaccination or injection was more than 6 months ago, you need to go back and get another. And there are two real important reasons for that. One is your response to the vaccination doesn't last much longer than 6 months. And number two, all of the monoclonal antibodies that used to be used for the earlier strains of COVID are no longer FDA approved. They don't work for the newer strains. So your best defense is go back and get vaccinated again. And that's for my next week.
Outstanding, outstanding. I always tell people be a part of the trend, have the latest, because you know you want the latest, and the latest thing to get right now is the latest COVID booster. Dr. Maya Green, you're until next Monday.
I was going to say that we are at a time right now, calling the tribes, it's time for that mask again. Well, if you feel like you need the mask, COVID is back, get your vaccine. If you're wearing the mask, remember over the nose, under the chin, the headband mask doesn't work, the beard mask doesn't work. You gotta, even if you know, so we know it's coming. If you one of those people, get you the cute ones like Nikki, you know what I'm saying? Get what you need, because we have to again protect our tribe. I'm thankful that a lot of the lessons we learned from the last go round are going to help us now. And be aware, just like Dr. Mason mentioned at the beginning, even with this, we can see what's going on around us. Start to look now, right? We don't have to wait to the symptom in our community of COVID is people dying, people think, poor outcomes, things like that. If we know from what we're saying here that it's coming back, we can start to implement things in our community to protect us and to protect our tribe. And that's my, until next Monday.
Thank you so very much. The numbers are trending up, and it's not trending up slowly. It's going faster than you think. They're kind of scary. Dr. Ansel, you're until next Monday.
Okay, had to unmute. Mine until next Sunday. Again, we're on the computer. We're on the meet. Okay. We're all trying
to. It was
order.
the scriptures. They got them.
It was the scriptures. Okay.
Well, our scripture in our office is Proverbs 29:8-19. People without vision will perish. And so we've been having that ever since we opened up. So we try to give people not just eyesight, but vision. And vision is how the sight is seeing 20/20 and how sharp you can see. But your vision is how you move through space, how you perceive your space, how you engage with other people. That's your vision. And real quick, since people are on computers a lot, ordering a whole bunch of stuff for Christmas online, just get up every 20 minutes, my 20/20 rule, and take 20 steps, 10 steps away, 10 steps back. What that does, it increases the circulation in your body, gets some blood flowing, and you're going to blink a little bit more and re-moisturize those eyes that have been dry out staring at the computer all for hours on end. So every 20 minutes, just get up, take 20 steps, sit back down. And that's mine until next Monday.
Outstanding. Thank you so much. Dr. Tony Hampton, you're until next Monday.
I definitely enjoy the engaging conversation. FYI, Dr. Mason, I recently had an interaction with Dr. Michael Greger, and I did invite him to my podcast. He's a plant-based guy that is well known, so hopefully he'll respond. And I think it's important that we have these conversations because, and it won't be if he joins me, it won't be a debate. It'll be like, here's a question, you give your answer, I give my answer. That's what I'm hoping to do, because I think people need to hear both arguments. And I think that's where we need to go. We should not be afraid to have these conversations. But for all those who are watching and listening, listen, the best experiment, as I suggested earlier, is your own experiment. And rather you're measuring metabolic measurements like insulin levels and your C-peptides and all of the bilirubin levels and apolipoprotein Bs, you can measure those things, your blood pressure, your blood sugar, or you just notice that your meter just goes up after certain foods. That's the best experiment. You don't need to look at a randomized controlled trial to know what's harming you. So, but it has been my experience that when people restrict carbs, and I do agree with Dr. Mason that even the diet doctor has a low carb, vegan, vegetarian diet plan. So you can absolutely do that. Greens have like 2 or 3 carbs per serving, so that's perfect. But a lot of the beans are starchy. So what we want to do is make sure people do the experiment so they'll know what harms them. But it has been my experience that people lose weight when they reduce carbs. They control their blood sugars. They reduce the risk for cancer, heart disease. Dementia is called type 3 diabetes for a reason. And obviously, when they started this whole low carb thing, it was for seizure control, and many people benefit. So I just encourage patients and those who are watching this program, do your own experiment, and I guarantee the answers that you need will reveal themselves. And I appreciate everybody that takes the time to learn these principles and to hang out with us.
Outstanding. Thank you so very much. Joe Harrington, your until next Monday.
Well, I've got two until next Mondays. I've been listening to the conversation and the back and forth. And as I was listening, I was reminded of this campaign that came out in 2004. It was a campaign of the American Cancer Society, American Diabetes Association, and the American Heart Association. They launched a campaign called Everyday Choices for a Healthier Life. It's the choices we make every day that impact our health. And they had 4 recommendations. Consume a healthy diet is a key component, and we've been talking a lot about diet, to achieving and maintaining a healthy body weight. Be physically active was number 2. Number 3, don't smoke and avoid tobacco smoke. Number 4, see a physician to assess your personal health risk. And you've heard from some doctors, now you need to see a doctor. The last that I want to offer in terms of my until next Monday is really a biblical quote for Dr. Johnson involving the eyes. Matthew 6:22. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light.
All right, Bishop Harrington, that is outstanding. Dr. Terry Mason, your until next Monday.
Well, I think that we've all heard a lot, and I think that we need to take it in, and it's hard sometimes because we get the terms confused: low carb, high carb, this, that, and that other. I am not one, but the one carbs I definitely would ask you to sort of stay away from are the processed carbs, the ones that aren't that way naturally. And when we eat, and we've got a long history of eating greens and beans and stuff like that. And I can tell you, growing up, we didn't see what we saw today. You know, we just got to remember, and as we get ready to go into the season of gluttony, and when I used to do the restart programs at the church, I call the season of gluttony. It starts around the Christmas holidays and goes straight through to after New Year's. Just be careful. Just be careful. Try and balance out what you're eating as best you possibly can. And yes, there'll be a lot of alcoholic beverages and stuff like that, but try to still drink your water. Get your water in if you can. And there's going to be a lot of good foods and a lot of pastries, a lot of cakes and a lot of pies and all that stuff. And I get it, but use good common sense so that you don't create problems for yourself going forward. Because at the end of the day, we want you all here healthy and able to be productive citizens for the new year. And so we want you to be blessed with great health and great wealth at the same time.
Outstanding, outstanding. Just want to remind you guys to join Congressman Davis right in front of our office at 2813 through 15 West on 5th Avenue on Friday, December 23rd for the Winter Wonder Fest. Come on out. We're going to have great gifts and things and toys and stuff for everyone. It's going to be a great family fun festival. So join us for the Winter Wonder Fest right in front of our office, 2813 through 15 West 5th Avenue. Dress warmly. It's going to be an outdoor event. We will have standing heaters out there, but it's an outdoor event. So dress warmly. Want to remind you of that. Will Congressman, take us home.
Well, let me just say this. I believe that being happy increases longevity, and that people who are happy live longer. And if you can not only be happy yourself, but if you can help make others happy, that increases not only your longevity, but also theirs. You know, I went to the president's Christmas party that he had last week, and it was kind of funny. The one complaint that some people had, they said, "Where's the food?" And they were running from place to place looking for the food. Well, they didn't have much food. You know, they had little things. And so as people were leaving as well, we going to the restaurant and get us something to eat. And I thought of something, my father was a very funny guy sometimes. He said, it ain't always what you eat. Sometimes it's the way how you chew it. And so we're going to eat during the holidays. We always do. But I think we're learning to balance some of those eating habits. And we're discovering that fruits, nuts, a little bit of this. I know the events that I kind of put on, I say, don't have much food. We don't want to tempt anybody so that they have to say, yield not to temptation, for yielding is sin. So people are beginning to have less food at many social events during the holiday, any other day. And I think they're learning that it's catching on. Very productive discussion. I thank all of us again for participating, but knowledge is to be used and not just known. To know is to have information. Knowledge is when you change behavior. And it takes a lot, but I think we're on our way. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for the evening. I must have something to eat. And so I got some carrots. I got some broccoli. You know, I had broccoli soup for lunch. And I told somebody it was actually good. Have a good night and thank you so much. Yeah.